What's going on, everybody? We are back with another episode of OC and TJ. It is your host, Collin O'Callahan, aka the OC in the title, aka the 5'9" Chicago kid that just loves to ramble about football. So, thank you for tuning in to another episode. That being said, let us just get it and let us just jump right into the picks. Week 3 was full of block kicks and anticipation and drama and upsets. And in week 4, I'm not really sure what's going to happen. There might be some predictable blowouts. There might be some games that I'm going to be surprised about. Who knows what the case may be, but I think we're about to find out in just a couple seconds. So let us start with tomorrow night's matchup on Thursday Night Football between the Seattle Seahawks and the Arizona Cardinals. This is going to be played in Glendale, Arizona, so the Cardinals have the home field advantage, but unfortunately, they're going to be without their top running back, James Conner, due to an ankle injury, and Cardinals' offense over the first 3 weeks has been pretty one-dimensional, so to speak. I mean, they've had 2 decent wins against the New Orleans Saints and then again against the Carolina Panthers. But last week, they failed to score more than 20 against the San Francisco 49ers. 49ers actually gifted them like a few chances to go ahead and take the lead. They turned the ball over all in the second half, mind you. They turned the ball over on downs at the 2-yard line. Then Mac Jones, not Mac Jones, but the 49ers offensive lineman Dominic Puny took a penalty in the end zone for a safety. Then Mac Jones threw an interception, yet the Cardinals offense punted after 3 straight opportunities. The only reason why they even had a lead in the first place was because of that safety. And to the 49ers' credit, every time that they got the ball back, they capitalized on their chances and they redeemed themselves by, taking the lead, or in the final drive case, they won the game thanks to a walk-off field goal from Eddie Piñeiro. So the Cardinals, suffered their first loss of the season, and now they got to welcome the Seattle Seahawks on a 4-day stretch, who, over Kyler Murray's career, have gone 8-2 against the former number 1 overall pick, and he has lost 7 straight to them since 2020 when he beat them 37-34 when Russell Wilson was the other quarterback. The Seattle Seahawks, they're coming off a 44-13 demolition against the New Orleans Saints. Sam Darnold had a perfect passer rating in the first half. He led the Seahawks offense on, they scored on almost every single drive when he was under center before, Drew Lock took over at garbage time. And, while the Saints showed some decent flashes and spurts, clearly they just did not play well enough to win. They gave up a blocked punt. They turned the ball over on downs on the opening drive. Their only points were when they were down like 34-3 or something like that. And, they just got completely manhandled in every single facet and every single aspect of the game. So, it wasn't completely surprising, but at the same time, you just wish that they kind of showed that competitive fire that they did through the first 2 games. So, I'm going to jump right into the pick. I'm going to go with the Seattle Seahawks because not only are the quarterbacks going to be the biggest X factors in this, but really it's going to come down to their pass rushes and, who's going to swarm the pocket more. Obviously, Kyler's a more mobile quarterback than Sam Darnold, and, Darnold tends to hold on to the ball too long. But I think when you look at both quarterbacks over the first few weeks, Sam Darnold is having a better season than Kyler Murray right now. And, he did have a rough first game against the 49ers, and the first half against Pittsburgh was not up to standard, but ever since then, he's been playing extremely well. He's got the 8th highest passer rating. He's 7th in passing yards. So I think that he's doing whatever he can to make sure that, the ball's not going into harm's way. And I think the Cardinals, they do have the more talented offense, in my opinion, but at the same time, they just always fall stuck in a neutral. And I don't know why, because when you have Marvin Harrison Jr., and Trey McBride and Michael Wilson and an offensive line that doesn't give up a whole lot of sacks, it just doesn't really make sense as to why they always give one-dimensional the worst possible time. And, the defense hasn't really been living up to standard as well because, they're not attacking the quarterback. They only have 5 sacks. And at the same time, they show positive moments, but just like they did last week, when they're on the field too long or, when the offense doesn't capitalize, they tend to get vulnerable. So I think the Seahawks will win this Thursday night game 30-17 because I think their defense will be more aggressive and I think they're more capable of forcing a couple of momentum swinging plays than Arizona. So now we move on to the Sunday morning game in Dublin, Ireland between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Minnesota Vikings. So this is going to be a lucky day for one of these teams, no pun intended. Both are coming off pretty impressive wins. The Vikings, a more lopsided one, as they beat down the Cincinnati Bengals 48-10. Carson Wentz didn't look too bad in his first start of the season. Didn't throw for a whole lot of yards, but to his credit, he didn't turn the ball over. He, managed the game well. He leaned on the running game. He did his best to lead as many scoring drives as possible. He took advantage of his opportunities, but the defense really set that tone from start to finish. I mean, when you could force four straight turnovers, well, not four straight, but four turnovers in a game, and three straight to end the first half, I mean, that's just not only impressive from Minnesota standpoint, but it was just absolutely, demoralizing for the Cincinnati Bengals. Isaiah Rodgers, he had an outstanding performance. Not only did he swing the entire momentum of the game around with a pick six, but a few drives later, or in the middle of the second quarter, a forced fumble and then a scoop and score for his second touchdown of the afternoon. I mean, he was more than deserving of winning the NFC Defensive Player of the Week. But I think this is going to be a little bit of a different challenge for the Minnesota Vikings because the Steelers forced 5 turnovers of their own against the New England Patriots. And, the offense wasn't completely perfect. Aaron Rodgers only threw for 139 yards. But, the more that New England stalled out and the more they kept coughing up the ball, the more momentum that Pittsburgh was getting. And eventually, late in the fourth quarter, Aaron Rodgers pulled off a vintage game-winning drive, had a big throw on 3rd and 6 to Calvin Austin off the back shoulder, and that was enough to win 21-14. I mean, New England had so many chances to win. They won the time of possession. They, had more yards. I mean, they got inside the 5-yard line, 4 times, but they coughed it up twice. And, right from the opening drive, you could just tell that this was not going to be a fun game for the Patriots. I mean, their defense led up 2 straight touchdown drives. They coughed the ball up in the 3rd play of the game, and, they didn't deserve to win. And Pittsburgh just took advantage of every opportunity that they got. So, in a 7-point game that was decided by 5 turnovers, I mean, Pittsburgh just, made the least amount of mistakes. So, I think entering this game, the last time Aaron Rodgers played the Minnesota Vikings on an international stage, it was not great, and it was not promising by any means necessary because he threw 3 interceptions. And Sam Darnold wasn't perfect, but at the same time, when you throw 3 picks in a game and you lose by 6, that tends to get you beat. And Aaron Rodgers knows that this is not going to be a walk in the park. So J.J. McCarthy is already ruled out. He's going to be out. He's going to miss this game with an ankle sprain. And Pittsburgh's defense is dealing with some injuries as well. They don't have Joey Porter Jr. They don't have Alex Highsmith. They don't have Deshaun Elliott. So really, it's just going to come down to, which offense is not going to screw up and which quarterback is going to, be able to persevere through the struggles. I kind of used that logic a couple of weeks ago when I picked the Steelers to beat the Seahawks, and I was clearly wrong there. But I think, listen, Vikings are going to be better coached, and I think that, obviously they have a way better defense, and, they're offensively, they have more capable playmakers, but it's just, I don't really know. For some reason, I just can't really trust Carson Wentz unless his defense is playing absolutely lights out. I'm not saying it's completely impossible for Aaron Rodgers to have another stinker like he did last year, but it's been a really up and down season, so it can really go either way for me. But for now, I'm going to pick the Steelers. I think it'll be really close. I don't think these offenses are going to play absolutely fantastic, but I don't really know I honestly really don't know what to expect. Either one of these quarterbacks is going to play extremely well, or they're going to completely wet the bed and be the biggest reason why they lose. So for now, I'm just going to say the Steelers win 23-16, and I know I'm probably going to be wrong, but whatever. It's going to be a good grudge match. I'm hoping that's the case. So next up, we got the Los Angeles Chargers versus the New York Giants, and it was a mismatch with Russell Wilson under center, and it's probably going to be a mismatch now that Jackson Dart is announced as the starting quarterback for the New York Giants. Oh boy, things are happening in Big Blue, and if you're Brian Dable and Joe Shea, you better hope to God that this works out in your favor, because if this turns into a disaster through the first few weeks of the season, then both of them are going to be fired. John Mara has just run out of patience when it comes to this football team. And I mean, just when you thought, they had a chance to kind of turn things around after barely losing to the Cowboys in overtime, they just get absolutely pummeled by the Kansas City Chiefs. Their offense didn't really have anywhere to go with the football besides handing it off to Cam Scatterbo. Malik Neighbors only caught 2 passes. Wan'Dale Robinson only had 1. Russell Wilson threw 2 interceptions. And, I mean, the Chiefs' offense wasn't even that great for the most part, but they minimized their mistakes. They leaned on the running game more. They showed a lot more explosion and intensity and passion. I mean, you got Andy Reid trying to bump some sense into Travis Kelce, on the sidelines. Like, you could just tell that there was no way in hell that they were going to fall to 0-3. And, the Giants do just predictably right on cue. They get in their own way. Their flaws get exposed to the full bear possible. And, I mean, they're just a terrible football team. And it was just, the Chiefs just didn't make any mistakes. And I don't really expect anything different to happen against the Chargers. I don't really need to, break down what happened at their win over the Denver Broncos. But defensively, they shut down Bo Nix. They only held him to only 150 yards passing. And they only gave up 9 first downs for the entire game. But the reason why it was so close was because Justin Herbert threw an interception near the end of the first half. Their defense let up a couple gashing drives near the end of the second quarter and at the start of the first, and at the start of the third, where they let Cortland Sutton get wide open for, a touchdown that cut the halftime deficit 10-7. Then they let J.K. Dobbins, one of their former running backs from last year, by the way, completely march down the field with these in just a few plays to go ahead 14-10. Then the special teams fumbles on the kickoff, and Denver kicks a field goal for an extra 3 points. But, the Chargers offense, they were in a really bad slump, from the start of the second quarter all the way to the middle of the fourth. But to their credit, their defense was keeping them in the game. They were not letting it get out of hand. And eventually in the fourth quarter, they found their rhythm. They got momentum. They found their spark. And Cameron Dicker ended up putting on the finishing touches with a walk-off field goal. So I honestly, even though they're 3-0, they kind of let the Broncos hang around for way too long. I know Denver's a really competitive team, and I know that they're going to stay in the playoff picture as long as they have that, aggressive pass rush. But Denver has not been a strong team this season, and I'll get more into that in just a second. But, I mean, they've been pretty vulnerable defensively. Their offense has had a lot more misses than hits. I mean, Bo Nix hasn't been a complete turnover magnet over the last couple weeks or so, but he is not putting the team on his back. He is, kind of holding them back from their true success. They're not really running the ball efficiently. Cortland Sutton seems to be the only playmaker in the passing game that has lived up to expectations. And, the secondary is kind of letting me down as well, because when you got Patrick Surtain and Janae Barron and Brandon Jones and Talanoa Hufanga, they're not really meshing the way that they're supposed to. And they just lost Drake Greenlaw. He's on IR because of a quad injury, so he's going to miss the next few weeks. So this defense is looking pretty thin right now, and I'm going to get more into that in just a second. But I think for the Chargers, this is a great way for them to bounce back. They're better coached. They have an MVP caliber quarterback in Justin Herbert. Their offense is more dynamic. They protect better. Their defense is obviously more aggressive. And the Giants just have way too many flaws and holes for them to be able to overcome all of this. So I don't think this is going to be close. To make a long story short, the Chargers are going to win 34-13. And when I look at this AFC South matchup, I honestly don't know what to expect, because we got the Houston Texans versus the Tennessee Titans, both of which are 0-3 right now. So this is going to be a very ugly game. And when you have two teams whose offenses are near the bottom of the pack, you got the Texans, who have scored the fewest points in the league through 3 weeks. And you got Cam Ward, who's been sacked 15 times, an average of 5 per game. It's going to be a sloppy afternoon. And when I think of it, when I really look at everything and all the factors to take into consideration, it's going to come down to the defenses. And Houston's is 10 times more aggressive and more confident and more trustworthy than the Tennessee Titans are. Because if the let me put it this way, the Titans offense makes one slip up, that's going to swing the entire momentum of the game. I mean, just look at last week against the Colts. Third play, boom, pick six to Kenny Moore, and they can't take the lead, from that point on, because Brian Callahan decides to attempt not one, but 2 60-yard field goals near the end of the first half. The defense gave up a score on every single possession in the second half, despite the fact that Cam Ward led 2 touchdown drives of 14 plays and 16 plays. I think that was the exact amount of plays that they run, but it's somewhere around the block. The point is, They just have way too many miscues. They're not well coached. Offensively, they're mediocre at best with a very, very crappy offensive line. The defense is not disciplined. They are second in penalties, which is number one in the AFC. New Orleans Saints number one, Tennessee Titans number two, and nothing's meshing. And if they continue to go down this path, Brian Callahan might not even make it to week 5. So Houston's defense is the furthest issue. We know that they're an incredibly lethal unit. They're going to do whatever it takes to win. The problem is if they're on the field too long because their offense is absolutely diarrhea, then they tend to fall apart at the worst possible time. But I think in this one, offensively, as long as they just hold on to the football and do the bare minimum, then I think they'll be fine. I think the Houston Texans are going to win this game because when it comes down to C.J. Stroud and Cam Ward, you might not expect too many differences, but C.J. Stroud is not a quarterback that I want to count out too much when he has a chance to win the game. And I know he couldn't do that last week against the Jacksonville Jaguars because three turnovers in the second half that really derail, a chance to beat the Jaguars on the road. Obviously, it's unacceptable, but I think this will be the chance for him to bounce back. And like I said, their defense is 10 times better than the Titans. I'm picking Houston to win 20-10. So, boom. Now we got an NFC grudge match between the Washington Commanders and the Atlanta Falcons. It's going to be Dan Quinn's first game back in Mercedes-Benz Stadium since being fired by the organization in the middle of the 2020 season. Jaden Daniels is not expected to play on Sunday because he is still battling through that knee sprain. So Marcus Mariota is slated to make his second start of the season, while the Atlanta Falcons are still rolling with Michael Penix after getting shut out by the Carolina Panthers 30-0. And when I really think about it, I can't even blame the Falcons defense too much for this loss. And I know the score is what it is. 30-0 is as bad as it gets. But at the start of the first half, Parker Romo misses 2 field goals. Okay? So Atlanta's already in a big enough hole as it is. They're down 10-0. Bryce Young was able to, capitalize off of both of those chances and, get some early points. And in the second half, the offense either turned the ball over or they couldn't convert on fourth down. It all started with a pick 6 by Charles Smith-Wade, and it just got incredibly worse from there. Bryce Young barely even threw for 120 yards, and yet it was still enough to win because his defense was just playing absolutely incredible. Penix ended up throwing for only 170 yards with 2 interceptions, got benched in the fourth quarter by Kirk Cousins, and the results were more or less the same. Turnover on downs, then a turnover. So defensively, I know that they're going to do what it takes to, kind of bottle up Mariota, was an Atlanta Falcon not too long ago, just a few seasons ago. So they kind of know what they're in for. Incredibly mobile. They're going to lead on the running game. And if they could shut down the run, then I definitely think they could slow down the pass, especially because Terry McLaurin might not play on Sunday due to a quad injury. So Falcons defense has actually been pretty strong this year. They're giving up the fewest passing yards. They're one of the top 10 scoring defenses in the league. And I get it. They gave up 30 points last week, but their offense just kept turning the ball over. And I think when I look at Marcus Mariota and Michael Penix Jr., both of them have incredibly talented offenses, but I think the Atlanta's is a little more healthier. They can really run the ball well when you got Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. The passing game, that has definitely not lived up to the hype because they have really plummeted in that category. And that's why they're the second worst scoring offense in football. And they just fired their wide receivers coach, Ike Hilliard, just a couple days ago or just this past Tuesday. So really, it's going to come down to, who's going to be able to throw the ball better. And when you've got Drake London and Darnell Mooney, Ray-Ray McCloud, and Kyle Pitts, with Washington's case, you could really only count on like Deebo Samuel and Zach Ertz. If you can't run the ball, then you have no chance of succeeding if you're the Washington Commanders. And I think the Falcons could do a pretty good job of, taking that away and, being just as lethal in the secondary. So with that being said, I'm going to pick the Falcons to win 27-19 as a result. Did I just say that twice? Whatever. It's okay. Now we move on to the Buffalo Bills versus the New Orleans Saints. I'm just going to cut it short. Bills are going to win 40-10, and it might be a little bit of a trap game because the Saints have beaten the Bills on the road since 1983, every time they met in Orchard Park, New York. But it's just, this is as one-sided of a matchup as there possibly could be. It's the biggest mismatch by far because, let me put it to you this way. Josh Allen, Spencer Rattler. James Cook, Alvin Kamara. Sean McDermott, Kellen Moore. Joe Brady offense, Brandon Staley defense. That should honestly say it all. Let's just move on quickly. We got the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Both teams are undefeated. They are 3-0 and are coming off, last-second victories. Excuse me. But one of them is going to lose their first game of the week. Which one will it be? We'll find out. Philadelphia Eagles are coming off a very, very close win against the Los Angeles Rams. They were down 26-7 through the start of the third quarter. The defense gave up points on every single possession, but to their credit, they only gave up 2 touchdowns and 4 field goals. The biggest reason why was because, outside of a 42-yard deep shot to Devontae Adams, the second touchdown was because Jared Verse came through with a timely strip sack on Jalen Hurts at the start of the second half. And, again, Rams offense was really, bend, but never really break. They couldn't really take advantage of, their chances. They were 1 for 4 in the red zone. And I get they were up 26-7, but this was still a winnable game for the Philadelphia Eagles. The problem was their passing offense was just absolutely atrocious. The one thing that I said at the start of the week was that they really needed to shut down Saquon Barkley for them to have a chance. And guess what? The Rams did just that. They completely took him out of the game plan, and Philadelphia's passing game was just non-existent. A.J. Brown, 1 target, 0 catches. Devontae Smith, not as much of a focal point. Dallas Goedert didn't even get targeted, and to make matters worse, their starting right tackle, Lane Johnson, got hurt. And then after the Rams went up 26-7, I don't know what it was, but a spark lit up on that sideline. They finally managed to turn it on. They got recentered. They got refocused. And all it really took was a 38-yard shot to A.J. Brown for things to really start to turn around in the right direction and for Philadelphia to regain some momentum and then eventually take the lead. And what really saved the day was not just their defense bottling up Matthew Stafford, but their special teams were the biggest heroes of the game because on the final 2 drives of the game, Joshua Carty was sent out to kick a 36-yard field goal and a 44-yard field goal. One to increase their lead to 8 and the other to win the game. Both kicks were blocked. The second one was a scoop and score for Jordan Davis, who's about, over 330 pounds? So this was absolutely a complimentary victory on all 3 faces with the Philadelphia Eagles. And, once their offense, got back into that rhythm, they couldn't be stopped. There was a little bit brief of a period in the fourth quarter where after the Eagles defense forced a 4th down stop, the Philadelphia Eagles, they thought it was a good decision to go for it on 4th and 6, and that obviously backfired. But thank goodness for that first block kick, or else Philadelphia probably, at the worst case scenario, that game goes to overtime. But there's no way that they were going to be able to make that furious of a comeback the way they did if it wasn't for Jalen Carter or Jordan Davis. So Tampa Bay, on the other hand, they're in a little bit of a different situation because they were up 23-6 against the Jets, and then they started to blow that lead. Their offense stalled out. They only scored 1 touchdown throughout the entire game, and the second touchdown was because of a pick 6 by Jamel Dean. The defense gave up 2 big touchdown drives, but Tampa still had a chance to go up by 9 and put the dagger in and put it away. But Will McDonald, of all players, on the field goal attempt, leaps over the pile, blocks the kick, recovers it, and takes it all the way back for the go-ahead touchdown. New York is ahead 27-26, but for the 3rd straight week, Baker Mayfield put together an incredibly clutch game-winning drive. He didn't have Mike Evans for the entire second half because of a hamstring injury, and yet he still overcame the odds, hit Sterling Shepard on a couple big plays, found Emeka Ibuka for a 28-yard pickup, and Chase McLaughlin, who's had a very shaky year so far, made the game-winning field goal to keep Tampa's undefeated season alive. That won them the game 29-27, and now we enter this game. I'm going to pick the Philadelphia Eagles, and it's not really so much because of, them being the defending champions. It's just that Philadelphia is really banged up right now. Or not Philadelphia, Tampa Bay is really banged up right now. They don't have Luke Gedeke. They don't have Cody Malk. You don't know if Tristan Wirfs is going to be back. They don't have Mike Evans. And the good news, though, is Chris Godwin is, set to make his first start of the season, but you don't know how he's going to look coming off that season-ending ankle injury from last year. So Godwin might be back. Tristan Wirfs' status is still in question. They're saying that he might play, but you don't really know how he's going to look, and you don't know how this offensive line is going to mesh now that they're, finally back in their natural spots. So I think, if Baker Mayfield gets another chance to, win the game and pull it off in the final minutes, then, this Eagles defense, they better hope to God that, somebody comes up with a big play, because for Tampa Bay, this is their biggest test of the season. This is not the Atlanta Falcons. This isn't the Houston Texans. This isn't the New York Jets. These are the defending Super Bowl champions coming into your house. You know that offensively they have the talent to, keep your defense on the field for an extended period of time. And if you're at Baker Mayfield, the last thing you can do is turn the ball over, because that could swing the entire momentum just like that. So I think it'll be a really close game. I think we're going to get another grudge match, but I think the Eagles will win 27-24. We're about to wrap up into the 1 o'clock slate. Let's jump into the Detroit Lions game against the Cleveland Browns. Both are coming off pretty impressive victories. The Cleveland Browns an even more surprising upset as they beat the Green Bay Packers 13-10 when Cleveland was 0-2 and Green Bay was 2-0. They were down 10-0 in the fourth quarter. And then all of a sudden, they made the furious comeback. I mean, it started with a field goal from Andre Schmidt, but, Jordan Love was getting sacked a whole bunch. They couldn't really run the football. They had a couple decent drives, but they were kind of letting Cleveland hang around for too long. And the defense was doing everything they could to win. It was just, the offense didn't have any chances. Well, they just couldn't take advantage of their chances to put the game away. And then all of a sudden, the minute that Andre Schmidt made that field goal to make it a one-score game, the Green Bay Packers just completely disintegrated, because a couple plays later, Jordan Love threw an interception right to Grant Delpit. He returned it all the way to the 4-yard line, and it only took one play for Quinshon Judkins to score the game-tying touchdown. And, to Green Bay's credit, they, pushed the ball down the field on their last drive. They got in a field goal range. They, ran the clock all the way down to 27 seconds. And then the most improbable thing happened. The same thing that happened in the Bucs game and the same that happened in the Eagles game. A blocked field goal by Shelby Harris for Cleveland to have one last chance of pulling off the biggest upset of the season thus far. And sure enough, it only took a pretty big completion to David Njoku to set up a 55-yard attempt for Schmidt. And it wasn't a guarantee that he was going to make it, because if you remember in week 1, he missed an extra point and a 36-yard field goal for the Cincinnati Bengals to barely escape with that win. And this 50-yard attempt, it splits through the uprights, and it's good. And the entire Cleveland Browns stadium goes absolutely berserk as they sort of get their season back on track. We all knew that their defense was, the real deal. They have given up the fewest total yards per game. They've given up the fewest passing yards to the fourth, or fewest rushing yards, I should say. They've only given up the fourth fewest passing yards. So this is going to be a pretty big test for the Detroit Lions. But if they could beat Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens, then they should just as well beat enough teams in the NFL, not just the NFC or the AFC. Jared Goff outplayed Lamar Jackson. There's no question about it. Only threw for just over 200 yards, but didn't turn the ball over, was really efficient, was poised and methodical from start to finish. He didn't turn the ball over. And Lamar Jackson, on the other hand, while he did throw for 280 yards with 3 touchdowns, he got sacked 7 times, okay, after scoring a touchdown to start the third quarter to take a 21-14 lead. They only scored 3 more points before a late desperation scoring drive with less than a minute remaining. And all it took was the second lost fumble in 3 weeks from Derrick Henry for Detroit to relinquish all of that momentum and for them to stay ahead of the chains and to not trail for the rest of the night. Amon-Ra St. Brown had an outstanding performance. He had a touchdown reception. He had an option pitch to Jahmyr Gibbs that gave Detroit the lead. midway through the second half. Sam Laporta had a bunch of third down conversions. But the biggest surprise to me was how well they were able to run the football. They ran for 224 yards against the Ravens defense that was top 5 in rushing over the past 2 years. That is just as impressive as it gets. So I think that if the Cleveland Browns are going to take away Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, then this is going to be a pretty big game for Jared Goff to really step up and to really put the team on his back. He did well enough last week. Let's see if he can do it again. And for that, I think the Lions will be able to win because we know that their defense is going to be really feisty. They have an exceptional amount of playmakers at all 3 levels. And you know that against this Cleveland Browns offense, the Lions, they are stronger and they are more dynamic. The thing is, if Jared Goff slips up or if anybody else in the Lions offense, makes that one mistake to kind of swing that momentum around, then it's not going to be a fun afternoon, and it might get just a little closer than you think. So I think the Lions will be able to hold on at home, though. I say they win 27-10. Next, we got the New England Patriots versus the Carolina Panthers. New England has yet to win a game at home. Carolina has yet to win on the road. One of these teams is going to be able to get their first one under their belt, and I think it'll be the Patriots, which is probably a jinx because every time I pick them to win, they lose, and the same goes vice versa. So I just – if they didn't turn the ball over against the Steelers as many times as they did, they would have beaten the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's no question. But Ramondre Stevenson's fumble issues, popped up at the worst possible time. Drake May coughed it up a couple times as well. Even Antonio Gibson lost the fumble. And he's actually, that was actually the biggest reason why Washington traded him was because of ball security issues. So it's very simple. Don't turn the ball over, and you'll be fine. And the same actually goes for the Carolina Panthers because that's actually how they won last week. Defense played outstanding, but offensively, they just did the bare minimum. They held onto the football. They minimized their mistakes. And as long as they just stayed out of the way, they were going to win. And that's exactly what happened. So it's going to come down to the turnover battle and which offense is going to be able to, establish more rhythm and momentum down the stretch. And I think at home, the New England Patriots have a better chance of doing that. It's going to be low scoring and ugly. This is not going to be a convincing win by any means necessary, but I say they win 17-10. So I might be wrong, but you know what? They'll be 1-3 for the fifth straight time with 3 different head coaches. So who knows? Maybe it'll actually highlight some of the ineptitude that's been going on in this organization. So now we get to the 405 to 425 slate. We start off with the San Francisco 49ers versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. I thought this would be a blowout at the start of the year. Now I think this could be incredibly close. Brock Purdy is trying to work his way back up to speed, but he's still dealing with that turf toe injury. Ricky Pearsall and Jawan Jennings, they didn't practice. George Kittle is still in IR. So is Brandon Ayuk. And the worst part about it is that their defense just lost Nick Bosa for the season with a torn ACL. So their heart and soul on the defensive side is going to, get surgery. He's going to miss the entire season. And it's a pretty big loss because without him, they don't really have that much of an explosive pass rush. But they are still a really well-coached unit. Robert Saleh has done a tremendous job. It's like he never left in the first place. Fred Warner is still playing at an all-pro level. The secondary is only giving up 160 passing yards a game, which is top 5 in the National Football League. But the thing is, the Jaguars' defense is pretty good themselves. Like, they have done a lot better than I actually thought they'd be. They're leading the league in takeaways. They're top 10 in plenty statistical categories. And if the 49ers offense isn't at full strength, then this could be a pretty decisive matchup here. But I think, if Brock Purdy is clear to play and he's going up against Trevor Lawrence, I think that, when it all comes down to it, I trust, Purdy more than I do with Lawrence when the game comes down to, those final 2 minutes. So Jaguars are coming off a 17-10 victory against the Houston Texans, but Texans have a pretty terrible offense. And to their credit, the offense took advantage of their chances. They capitalized on their opportunities, and they capitalized off the turnover of their opponent's mistakes. But the 49ers present a bigger challenge because their offense is more dynamic. They got Christian McCaffrey, who's, still healthy for the time being. And, yeah, like I said, just comes down to the quarterbacks here. So I'm going to pick the 49ers to win this game 24-20. Now we move on to one of the more exciting matchups of the 4 o'clock slate. The Los Angeles Rams hosting the Indianapolis Colts. Indianapolis is 3-0, while LA is 2-1 after blowing a 26-7 lead to the Philadelphia Eagles. But I think this is the game where, the Rams bounce back. I don't think the Colts have faced a lot of tough challenges yet, and this is going to be their first one of the season. They blew out the Miami Dolphins. Okay, that was respectable, but at the same time, Miami's defense was very suspect, and Dolphins ended up being a pretty bad team. They're 0-3 right now. Their offense is, not holding on to the football the way they should, and they're not as explosive as they used to be. The next week, they beat the Denver Broncos, which was a more impressive victory. So I will give them credit for that, but you can also say, well, the Broncos have Bo Nix, and he's not really exactly, the saving grace for them. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying, that's, the argument that you can make. And then the next week was against the Tennessee Titans, who are just, an absolute dumpster fire. With the Rams, this is the most complete team that the Colts are going up against this year, because the Rams have a dynamic offense with Sean McVay. You got Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams as your top 2 receivers. You got a touchdown Magnin and Kyron Williams. Your defense has really made incredible strides. And I know that they got absolutely carved up last week against the Philadelphia Eagles, but really, if they can shut down Jonathan Taylor and force Daniel Jones to beat him by himself, then I think that is what it's going to take for the Rams to win that game. They're at home. They're coming off a pretty unfortunate loss. And more importantly, like I said, Indianapolis, they've only put up the ball one time through 3 weeks. And now they're going up against, one of the tougher teams in the National Football League that is going to compete for a playoff spot, and that's going to be one of the biggest, it is going to be a contender for a division title. So I'm going to pick the Rams to win 30-17 because of, how complete the roster is, of how better their coaching staff is, and really just, I know Daniel Jones has been playing great, but if you can't run the ball, then I don't really know what to expect if you're forced to throw the ball 30 to 40 times. So, all right, we're wrapping up here, but we're getting into the final 2 games of the Sunday afternoon window. The Kansas City Chiefs versus the Baltimore Ravens. The bottom line for this one, the reason why I'm picking the Chiefs, I need to believe that the Ravens are going to win when I actually see it. Lamar Jackson has only beaten Patrick Mahomes one time, and it was at home in 2021 on Sunday Night Football. He has not won a game in Arrowhead Stadium. And I know they've had a lot of battles that, have been very close, but Patrick Mahomes has had the upper edge every single time. And one of these teams is going to be 1-3 at the end of the week, which is absolutely bizarre, and it's going to determine the course of their season. But if you ask me, the Baltimore Ravens, they're last year's Cincinnati Bengals. Their defense is horrible. Their offense, self-destruct at the worst possible time, and it just results in a heartbreaking and gut-wrenching loss. So I like the Chiefs better in this game. They're at home. I trust Danny Reed more than John Harbaugh. I sure as hell trust Patrick Mahomes more than I do John Harbaugh. And really, it comes down to the defenses, and I'd rather have Steve Spagnuolo's group over whatever Zach Orr has to work with. And, it's like we're right back to where we were at the start of last year. So I'm going to pick the Kansas City Chiefs to win 27-24. Last but not least, before we get to the primetime window, we have the Chicago Bears versus the Raiders. So the Raiders are coming off a double-digit loss to the Washington Commanders, and really they just got outplayed in all 3 phases. Marcus Mariota had an efficient 200-plus yard performance with a couple touchdowns. They ran the ball for 200 yards. Their defense had 5 sacks, and 2 huge plays by the special teams just really opened the floodgates. One, a 69-yard return on the kickoff from Deebo Samuel in the opening minutes, and then midway through the third quarter, Jalen Noel, takes it the distance to go ahead 27-10 on a punt return. And, Trey Tucker had a great game, 145 yards, 3 touchdowns, but at the same time, they just couldn't make enough plays to, really stay in it. They tied the game at 10, and that was the only point of the game where it was truly competitive. So the Bears, on the other hand, are coming off their first victory of the season in the Ben Johnson era. They beat up the Dallas Cowboys 31-14, and just when you thought they were going to get gashed and they were going to get demoralized on their home field once again. On the second offensive play of the game for the Cowboys, Javonte Williams got the ball ripped out by Tyreek Stevenson at the very last second as he was trying to get out of bounds. And the Bears recover it for really just a key saving, for really just a momentum swinging and, game-changing, football play. And from that point on, the Bears just never took their foot off the gas on both sides of the ball. Caleb Williams threw for 298 yards with 4 touchdowns. Luther Burden III scored his first career touchdown on a flea flicker. Tremaine Edmonds had 2 interceptions off of Dak Prescott. I mean, the backups came in and Joe Milton threw a pick of his own. The defense had a couple of sacks. It was really the most complete game from the Bears that I've seen in, the Caleb Williams era. And I hope that they can, keep the spark going and finally turn their season around. But at the same time, you could say, well, the Cowboys defense is pretty awful. And Matt Eberflus is, the defensive coordinator, so it wasn't too surprising if you're a fan of the Bears. So, I think in this game, anytime I pick the winner of this particular matchup over the last few seasons, I've definitely been wrong. So this is probably me jinxing them more than anything. But I like the Bears in this game because it can really go either way. I don't think it's going to be a blowout by any means necessary. I think it'll be really close. Both offenses are going to really stall out here, and I think the defenses will step it up. But I like the way their offense played last week. I like how creative, the play calling was on Ben Johnson's end of things. I liked how more, passionate the defense played. And, listen, I personally like Geno Smith, but at the same time, he has not played well through these 2 weeks. And if I pick the Raiders to win here, then I'm going to really expect a lot of him, and I just don't really know if that's going to be the case. So I'm going to pick the Bears to win here 20-17, but I just hope to God that they don't revert back to what they were in weeks 1 and 2, because that's just going to be an outright punch in the face. So Sunday Night Football between the Green Bay Packers and the Dallas Cowboys. Parsons is back in Jerry World, and he is going to be extremely motivated to get the ultimate last laugh against the team that traded him away just a month ago. He wants to deny that, it's not about me. It's going to be about the team. I don't know this personally. I don't think there have been any reports or quotes about that, but that's going to be my guess. But we all know that he is going to absolutely look forward to sacking Dak Prescott and to, beat up his former team. And honestly, I see that happening because Green Bay Packers, when it comes to playing in, AT&T Stadium, they've had a lot of great fortune in that stadium. I mean, heck, they won a Super Bowl in 2010 with Aaron Rodgers against the Pittsburgh Steelers in that same exact venue. So now that it's passed on to Jordan Love, I expect no different. He did it a couple years ago in the wild card against, when he was the 7th seed in the NFC, and now he has a chance to, get another win under his belt. So they're coming off a very, very rough and disturbing and unacceptable loss to the Cleveland Browns, but this is definitely going to be their ultimate bounce-back game. The Cowboys' defense is absolutely pathetic. The offense, you don't know if they're going to have CeeDee Lamb. He tweaked his ankle, early in the game last week, and when you can't stretch the ball down the field against this Packers defense, then you're going to be in a whole lot of trouble. Really, if you're on Green Bay's offense, you got to make sure you have a way more efficient performance than you did last week, because what happened against the Browns was just completely unacceptable. Blowing a 10-0 lead because, you can't run the ball extremely well. You couldn't, time up on the passing plays when you needed to. You couldn't block the Cleveland Browns pass rush. You gave up 4 sacks. And now you're going to the Cowboys defense that is significantly weak in all of those aspects. So I think the Packers bounce back here in a tremendous way. I say they win 34-23. Now we get to the Monday night window. We got the 2 0-3 teams in the AFC East, the Miami Dolphins and the New York Jets, versus a pretty exciting grudge match in the AFC between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Denver Broncos here. So I'm going to cut it short. I'm going to pick the Dolphins to win this game because, listen, it's not going to be a blowout. I don't think it's going to be a completely lopsided victory, but Tua is still undefeated against the Jets. I think, I'm not sure if Justin Fields is going to be back for this game. They didn't really reveal his status. My guess is they probably will bring him back and that he will be healthy enough to play. If that's not the case, then Tyrod Taylor is going to give it another go for the week. But if that's the case, I like the way the Dolphins offense fought back last week. They didn't play great, at certain points, especially down the stretch, but you could tell that they were not going to let that game against the Bills turn into a complete walk in the park. I mean, they took the lead at first. They were up 7-0 thanks to a huge kickoff return by D. Eskridge. And, after they went 3-and-out, the Buffalo Bills, they got back into the game. They took the lead. They never lost it for the rest of the game. But, the Dolphins had plenty of chances to, relinquish, to reclaim momentum and to potentially steal a game on the road. But a roughing the kicker penalty plus a boneheaded interception from Tua Tagovailoa completely ended that false optimism and completely crushed it, in the span of 2 seconds. So I think against this Jets team, defensively, they're okay, but they're not great. And offensively, they just leave a lot to be desired because if you can't run the ball, then the only passing option that they really have is Garrett Wilson. So I feel like if you're the Miami Dolphins, if you can't take away that, then you really don't deserve to win this game. But I like that Miami Dolphins offense to kind of really pick up where they left off, to kind of, establish some momentum and to, have a more balanced attack than they did last week. I say they win 27-17. And with the next Monday night game, I'm picking the Broncos for a couple of reasons. One, because I like their defense better. And two, when it comes to the quarterback situation, in a game that's being played in Mile High, I trust Bo Nix to, take care of the ball better and to, have a more efficient performance than I do with Jake Browning, whose offense turned the ball over 4 times and threw the pick 6 that really opened the floodgates against the Minnesota Vikings here. So I know both defenses are going to play tough. They're going to play extremely gritty, but I trust Denver's defense to really carry the team from start to finish more. So I'll say they win 26-16. And with that, all of the picks are officially locked. Thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode of OC and TJ. Make sure you like and subscribe for additional content. And I'll be back next week for another picks episode. So buckle up because the show's about to begin. Hope you enjoy the rest of your week. We're almost in October. And yeah, that's just about it.